Back. And it's COMP1002, week 11, lesson 11, part 2, and we're talking about navigation with unordered lists. And we're going to add some one other piece to our navigation before we move on. So going back, what I want to do here is in our nav, when I hover over an element, like for example our list item, I hover over our list item or our anchor tag, I want the list item to light up. When I hover over the anchor element, how do I do that? Does it work now?
Yeah.
Okay. So how do I do that? It's a pseudo class, but I want to target something else. Let's try this out. So I want to say this: main nav. I hover over my anchor tag, but what I want to affect, right? What I want to affect is my list item. That's what I want to affect. How do I affect the list item, the ascendant? How do I affect the ascendant, right, of my list? For example, if I do a hover, just leave that alone, and I want to change the background color of my anchor tag, I could do that, right? But that's not really what I want to do. I want to hover over my anchor tag. When I hover over it, then my list item lights up. If I did it the other way around, if I went like this, if I hover over my list item, and I want to change my background color, background dash color. I want to change my background color to a dark gray. Dark gray. One of these, right? Kind of a lighter color. That's easy. So when I go back to my page, which is here, and I refresh, if I hover over, I get this. And I get a bit of a line here too, which is really annoying to me. But notice how only here, not here or here. Everything's okay here, but here I got a bit of a line, my anchor tag, and there's a bit of separation between the two. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. But notice how I do that. So I go here, products, services, about us, and contact us, no problem. And my home page has this separator right now. Okay? You guys should have the same thing if you just put that in. But even if I hover over, unless I'm physically over the link, I'm not going to get a hand. I can click on this all I want, and nothing's going to happen, right? I need to get a hand for my link to click. So when I don't want to just hover over my UL, that's neat. But what if I just want to hover over my anchor tag itself? How could I use an ascendant selector, if you will, right? So I can target that. So ascendant CSS, right? I spelled the parent selectors in CSS for CSS tricks. So here it is. So notice that I have my greater than sign is my descendant, and my less than sign is my ascendant. Let's try that out. So if I go back to here, and I say, well, you know what? It's not my anchor tag I want to hover over. So if I go, when I hover over my anchor tag, I want to affect the ascendant list item. So the ascendant list item, right? And it says here, it says expected this. I expect this in my code, right? And same thing if I go descendant, right? If I go descendant, no problem. But I go ascendant, I got an anchor, I got an issue, right? It's almost like I can't do it, right? I'm just showing you, like, so you may have searched it up and get this. Let's try this out. So if I go back down here like this, refresh, and I go over here and I hover over and nothing happens, right? Because my ascendant selector, like the one we just saw, parent selector, this is nice. Here's the suggested syntax, but we never had it, right? I could do, whatchamacallit, you can suggest this syntax, parent, right? But there is no real agreement on how to do an ascendant selector or a parent selector. And if you look over this, it should have come up, A active, kind of stuff, LIA active. And if you notice in the answers, it says, if there was a way to do it, it would be either in the current CSS selector specs, whatever, and there isn't anything else. You can use it says the selectors level 4 working draft includes has, which we're not going to use because that's not really supported, right? So there really isn't a way to select the parent selector, if you will, ascendant selector. I can do descendant selectors, no problem, but I can't do the other way around. So that presents a little bit of a problem when it comes to our navigation, right? So I can't do it that way. I could do this way though, which is what we want to try and do. We want to kind of make it so that the LI hovers, and I would put all of my my hover techniques over here like this, right? Main nav, LI hover. When I hover over my main nav, it's cool. Now I want to specify that when I hover over my my about us, my info, right? I want to kind of break this out a little bit into a sub-navigation list. So how would I do that? First of all, let's do the HTML piece to show you what it looks like, right? So this is good. I got my about us, right, in my list item. And then underneath this, we're going to make some space. We're going to put in another UL tag, right, with, let's say, a couple of list items, right? So a couple of list items with some, two, let's say, with inside of them, there's going to be an anchor tag. And the anchor tags are all going to have this href value here as well. And they're going to have some a couple of links. We'll say link number 1 or $, and so on. There it is. So it's kind of like an unordered list nested inside of a list item. Undo. So all I'm doing is I'm specifying this unordered list, right? Well, here's the effect I want if I was plotting this out in code, if I was actually going to code this out. I would want that my unordered list, this sub-navigation list or this drop-down menu, first of all, I would want this thing to have a class of drop-down menu so I can target it. So I'm going to say class for my unordered list, and we'll make this of the class is drop-down. That's my class, right? My class of dropdown. Okay, cool. If I have a class of dropdown, that means that any item that I have a class of dropdown, by default, should be hidden. So my display isn't going to be display block or display inline. It's going to be display none. All right? You can also make it so it's visibility. There's two different properties to do the same thing, right? So let's do that. So we're going to do like this is subnav. So we're going to kind of specify another little style. So sub, or we're going to call this drop-down list styles. And we're going to say dot dropdown is going to have a specific thing. One of the things it's going to have is we're going to have our display is none. That's one thing we need to have, right? And we also want to make it so that when I hover over my list item that has this list on it, right? I want to make my display block, right? Now this is where I can use my ascendant selector, right? So I can say something like this. When I hover over a list item that has the drop down in it, right? Should I have my drop down in my UL? Yes. Right? But when I hover over my list item, this list item that has the drop down in it, right? I want to make it so that the display is blocked. How do I code that one? Well, let's try this out. So list li hover that contains a drop down. Right? When I hover over a list item that contains a drop-down, right? Well, I'm hovering over a list item that contains a drop-down, right? Well, that's cool and all, right? But I want my drop-down being affected somehow, right? Well, let's see. My drop-down then should be display block. If I can code this right. Go back over here to my drop-down navigation and refresh. I know my about us has a display of drop-down. There it is. Hover over it, and bam, I get this. And I get this kind of weird-ass look to it. How come? Kind of puts everything out of kilter. Yeah.
One thing is you could put it as inline block instead of block.
Okay, let's try that out. I like your thinking. So instead of block, I can put inline block like I did before. But if I put inline block, I put it in the same level, no? Don't want that to happen, right? I like how you're thinking though. So that's going to just put it in there. That's what it's going to do, right? That's neat. It's almost like it hides the links until I hover over it, right? Could do position absolute, but I want to try and do, let's try position relative first. I like your thinking though. So let's try this first. So I'll go back to here. It can't be inline block, because that would be bad, but I want to make it so it's block. And then, and before my block, I want to put in position for my list item, for my drop-down menu. Position should be absolute anyway, right? In fact, it shouldn't be here. All that should be is just positioning it so it's kind of on, right? We're kind of our displays is block or none. I'm gonna show or hide basically, right? So here I should have something like this. For my drop down in general, it should be, my drop down should have a position something. Position, let's try it relative. Position relative. And let's say, you know what? We're going to turn on some styles here. We have our drop down. I want to make it so that we have our test border on. Test border. Just want to see it. Okay, so here's my test border. And then see what happens. Back. And I want to refresh. And I want to hover over it. And now this is what happens to it. So my link actually is link. It's block, and it has 1 and 2. How come? I said block, not inline block, but it's down here, right? How come? So this is my list item itself. My list item has a drop down, right? My list item has a drop down, and these list items happen next to each other. Why? What's happening? Why is it happening that way? Well, there's a couple reasons why. One of them is, up here we specified that all list items inside of our main nav, which, by the way, includes stuff inside of our drop-down list, which is inside of our main nav, right? All of our list items are, you know, we have down here, for our list item itself is display inline block. So that's definitely not what we want, right? I want to change that. Means that our list items that are in our drop-down then have to be, let's go down here. So drop-down. So list items that are in our drop-down, right, can't be display inline block. They're going to be display as block. We're overriding the style that was above, right? We're targeting the list item that's inside, only the ones that are inside of the drop-down, right? I'm going to try and fix that. Fresh. A little better, right? A little better. Still, we're kind of getting offsetting everything else, right? When we do this kind of thing. Kind of goes away, right? Kind of makes this one, you know, this thing messes all the other ones up. If I hover over them, they kind of appear again, but right now it's kind of this effect is what's happening. And the reason why we're not seeing the other ones, by the way, is because the background here is white and these ones are white. They're actually there. I can't point to them because it's not going to show up. I can't freeze the page because I'm having an event happen. What's happening is it's driving all the other ones. Because the other ones are all inline block, they're all being driven down. Let me show you the effect of that. So if I go back to my page, and I mentioned that all of them are inline block, right? Here they are. All my list items inside of my display are inline block. If I just make them inline, and if I refresh, there's no effect here except for this. That's bad, right? Take a look at this. Look what's happening here, right? But when I hover over this, now I get this really weird effect. Look, take a look at what's happening. It's trying to adjust for what I'm trying to do, right? As I'm hovering over, I get this About Us page, and it's trying to do it inline, right? So inline block was the right call, right? Because especially with my home link, notice how my home link is displaying the way it's displaying, right? Amen. It depends on how I'm coding it, right? In general. So I'm going to undo that change. So what do I really want to happen, right? Well, my drop-down itself, even though it's a display of none, right? My position is relative, right? What if I position it down from the top? So if I do something like this, well, position it down from the top, let's say 5 pixels. And so we can separate it a little bit. Will it actually do it? Let's see. Well, yeah, it does. Still pushes everything else down because this is in line with everything else. When I use something that's relative, when I use something that's relative to something else, I'm actually injecting content. It's actually always there. My list item, that's this UL, that's nested within this list item is actually always there. It's just hidden, right? Hidden. So for now, let's just make it so it's not hidden so we can deal with it, right? Because otherwise we see this weird effect. Or let's make sure that it's, instead of position relative, what if we made it position absolute? And we talked about, maybe that's a bad thing, for when it comes to our drop downs within our responsive design, right? Well, we can get rid of that though. Let's refresh, hover over, and now this is good, right? Doesn't mess up our setup, right? It still shows me my link. It's kind of messed up. I can't see my link. Well, because I haven't specified a background for my link anymore, and it's kind of hovering on top of there. I got to push it down a little bit. So let's do that. So let's go back to here, and I want to produce a background for my dropdown UL, right? So my UL should have its own background. And the background color should definitely be black to go with our theme, right? So background dash color should be black, right? So we're going with the black theme. Refresh and see what I get. I get this. This is good because it shows each one of our links kind of, defined, right? And now they're small. Notice our links are pretty darn small, right? So what I want is this whole size here to be 30 pixels because that's how or 60 pixels, whatever we made it for the top. Notice our width for my nav is my anchor tags are all 60 pixels. Every anchor tag that's in my nav, right? By the way, if I take that width away, no effect. So we can remove that little specifier, right? And without any kind of effect. But I want to push it down way more than 5. And we know that the header of our bar is 40 pixels. So 40 pixels would be the right number, right, if we're going to push it down, right? Let's try this out. So again, I'm going to go back to my example and go refresh. And now when I hover over, it's 40 pixels exactly. So here's my drop-down list that comes up every time I hover over it, right? Now, it's not quite wide enough. I definitely want to make it at least as wide as these, right? And they're not 40 pixels because I told you before, when I do this, it kind of takes them away, right? So why? Because it's only anchor tags, all anchor tags within main nav, right? So I could specify minimum size. Because they're absolute though, let's add another little wrinkle in our problem, right? I'm going to add in here on this side. We've only dealt with header. Let's add a paragraph tag here, just floating by itself, right? A paragraph tag. Right, with lorem ipsum text of like, I don't know, 200, right? And now let's see what we get when I do that. So refresh. Here's my lorem ipsum text. What happens when I hover over it now? Well, that's okay, because this is kind of hovering on top of that one. But just to ensure that it does, what happens also when I kind of come out of it? Look, I can't even get to my, only from here. Kind of makes it so I sometimes, especially from this corner, look how it is gone, right? Well, because there's nothing down here, right? If I go straight down, it's gone. So my little hover, my little list is very small. It's going to hug the size of my text, unless I make my list items a certain minimum length, width. I mean, let's try that. So all list items in my dropdown have a display block and have a minimum width of, let's say, 40 pixels or 60 pixels. If I do that and refresh and I hover over, no effect. Because I didn't specify width, I specified minimum width. right? Which means it could have 60 or more. Let's try that again. How come my list item's not working this way for my drop-down, right? Refresh, hover over, and we got a problem, right? My UL is even worse. It's even worse than before, right? How come it's doing that? Well, my unordered list itself has a width, right? And I haven't really specified it. I could do, in my unordered list, I could make it so that my drop-down itself has the wrap, kind of overflow property of auto, right? So it wraps my list items. I could do that. Let's see if that works. Nope. Okay. How about if I specify a width for this one? So if I say, well, I want to have a width of at least 60 pixels for my drop-down. Nope. How come? Let's see, by the way, if I go down here and look at my list item that's inside here, so if I click on this one, right, inside my my class for my about, services about, right, it's not this one, it's this one. Here's my drop-down list. If I click on my drop-down list, notice how it has a width of 60, and if I kind of click it or not, it doesn't show up, right, my width of 60. My overflow doesn't work. So let's make it so that just to see it, right, my drop-down shouldn't have a display of none. Let's put it back in place. This is where it looks like, right? We're just going to play with it here. So, and again, I'm going to remove stuff to make it so you can see what it does. So if I take off my position absolute and I do this, it appears way down here, right? I don't want that. So my home and everything else gets shifted down if I don't make my position absolute. If I take away my background color, it takes away my background color. That's bad. If I get my width to 60, it doesn't do anything. So I can kind of remove that and no effect. Overflow auto, right, takes that effect. I can also change this from overflow auto to overflow hidden. That will affect it for sure, right? Or should, but no effect on my little, this is my unordered list that I'm targeting, right? Okay, what other things? If I target my anchor tags, there's my anchor tag. I can see that my anchor tag is being affected by, it's being inheriting from main nav with a padding of 10 and a line height of 40, because these all have the same thing, and a width of 60. No effect. Text decoration none. They all get back their underlines, which I don't want. Color of white makes them from the blue color to white, right? Now, specifically for this anchor tag, right? Have I specified the styling for this anchor tag different than the other ones? And how come it's squishing in like this, right? Anyone have a suggestion? How about the smart people like Kayla and the people over here in the back? Or how about the guys in the back? Any suggestions to make my UL, my unordered list, or the guys over in the middle table, right? How about the guys over here, the smart people on this table here? Any way of making my, unordered list wider by default, minimum width, right? Because right now, look, I made it, but as I'm hovering in here, what's happening? This, by the way, the red border is showing my unordered list. That's what's around my red border. So notice how my test border is on the unordered list itself, right? And also notice how I have a pixel width of 63 pixels, right? 63 wide by 163 down. Okay, let's try this out again a little bit more. So if I go down to here, and I've specified that my list items have a width of 60, each list item. And my drop-down menu has a width of 60. Maybe it's not enough. Maybe I'll add in 100. Or, let's make it 100 pixels for my width, for my drop-down. Refresh. That's a little better, right? Still not quite wide enough. It looks like my drop-down list is a little, my list item is a little bit more than that, right? So let's get rid of this for a second. That's a little better. It hovers over, but I'm not happy with the hover effect because we have it here, right, for 100. But as I hover down, look how it loses it sometimes. If I hover down into this, sometimes it grabs it and sometimes it doesn't. How come? Because unless I'm physically in here, right, how I lose it from the top. Remember I talked about this little space between our anchor tag? I want to make my anchor tag have a full hit, right? So how would I do that? Well, let's try to talk about that. Anchor tag height, right? How do I affect my anchor tag height? And it says, in CSS, my tag A, display inline block, background color, blah, 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 height is 125 pixels and width is 250 pixels. I didn't specify a height before, and can I even do this for an A tag? And because remember, some properties don't work. And it says you need to make your anchor display block, and then it will accept the width and height values. Let's go back. So if I go back to my code, did I make my anchor tags display block? Well, no. But remember what I do, what happens when I do that. If I go to display block for my anchor tags, so I can take the width and the height options. Now it's going to mess my whole thing up. Because before it was ignoring them. Right? Refresh. Yeah, baby. Huh? Huh? What do you think? The width and the height options are bad, right? So I can't make it 60 pixels for my anchor tags. I got to make them like 100 pixels at least. Okay. Now they're back. Notice how they have a bunch of space around them, right? Because 100 pixels is a little bit too much. But the good effect about this is, other than home, which is messed up, other than home, it takes up the entire, pretty much the entire height and or the width of the anchor tag. Now there's where I have a bit of an issue, right? Here we go here. And as I there's just a space between this and the top. So let's make the height of my anchor tag at least 40 pixels. So let's do that too. So we go in there. Before I didn't accept it because I didn't have display block, right? So height, let's say 40 pixels. I'll fix my display in a second. Fresh. See, it's still not quite good enough. How about now they're outside. Take a look. Now my anchor tag is actually pushing my display. So when I hover over, it's not the effect I wanted. Neat effect, but not the effect I wanted. But if I do this and I hover over this, then still I got this really weird disconnect when I kind of hover over. Until if I hover over here, I'm okay. But sometimes when I hover over, it's gone. And there's no effect for the home. And this might be a good effect. If you wanted my home to be a little bit larger than the rest, you might want to do something like this. But I think 40 is probably the most I want. So it kind of expands it to the top, right? Remember my UL, my unordered list, and my list item, which is display inline block, right? My list item could also have an overflow value of auto. And if I were to do that and refresh, it kind of hides everything. It still has a problem kind of coming to here, right, from here to here. See that? Now what's the problem? There's also this border that we have, right? Let's get rid of that border for a second. That test border is like 2 pixels. That 2 pixels could be disconnecting the stuff around it, right? So let's get rid of that test border for a second and refresh. And now I have the same problem. There's no effect, no difference. In fact, it's maybe even worse, except for right there, right? I need to make this bigger, this link. The link has to be at least 100 pixels, right? My UL. And if you notice in my dropdown, I said my width is 100, right? But in my display is none by default. When I go to display block, right, it should accept my width and my height. So maybe what I should do is when I go to display width, display block, grab this, and put it into here, right? So it doesn't get overwritten. And if 100 is not enough, we can also specify other values, right? Because my display block, I'm changing my drop down, so my display is 100. Let's try that out. Fresh. Still no difference. Let's make it so it's just curious. Let's make it so it's 200. See what happens. Better. More of a problem with my drop down though. As I hover from one to the next place, it's kind of got that disconnect for a second. I disconnect right about there, right? When I kind of go into it. And to see that thing, I can put a class of border color. We'll put a border color around my drop down, which is this one. The one that's going to be inside my this class here. So we'll say my list item is going to have a class of test border as I'm troubleshooting, right? Fresh, there it is. Now it pushes everything else down because of my border, but I don't care, right? Notice how my list item is okay, right? But as I come to here, it fades. Why? Because my list item itself, right, is good. But what about my anchor tag? I want to see what that has. This is I'll leave that class of border there. But for this one, I want to also add in a class next to this one, where my anchor tag itself. I want to add a class of test border to that too, except it will be test border green. So that I want to have a different color for it. It'll offset it a little bit because of the border itself, but it's okay. Okay, take a look. My anchor is still good, right? But the only time it hovers over, right, is when I'm right on top of it. Look, here it works, right? There's where it finishes almost like it finishes once I hover outside of my nav, it disappears. So how to fix that? Well, because we have our main nav up here, right? And we also have to look at my main nav list items is covering everything. That's okay, this overflow auto. What if I made my UL itself overflow auto too, right? So it kind of wraps that stuff, overflow auto. We're being very specific here, right? That's better. See, now it doesn't go away. So that's the effect I want, right? Definitely the effect I do want, right? These links, there's obviously this menu is a little bit too big. So let's take away some of those test borders for a second. So we'll say go back to the HTML and take away this test border here. We don't need that anymore because we've tested the crap out of that one and the green one too. So again, what I'm trying to show you is some of the best ways to do your troubleshooting is to use some kind of test border, right? Because they're all boxes at the end of the day, right? So refresh. And now when I hover over, it's not bad. It's a little bit wide for me, as an example. So I could shorten it now. It's not 200. I don't need 200. But I definitely need it so it's a little bit bigger. So let's make it so that instead of 200, it's 150 or 120. Now this presents a problem, doesn't it, when it comes to responsive design? And I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. And this is okay. What if I wanted my links, to fit into this range? I could. This is okay though. This to me is probably fine. They're also centered. That's kind of weird too. The list items are also centered because they have a minimum width for these list items, right? Which I have. They accept the minimum width for all anchor tags inside of my inside of this area here, right? So I could say that my list items inside my drop-down list have less width, right? Because they're going to be one on top of the other, right? So I could do that as well. And also, they're right now by default, all anchor tags are display block that are inside my my main nav, which is fine too. So how do I do that? I want to say, well, my drop-down anchor tags, specifically all the anchor tags in my drop-down, have a width, right, of let's say 60, right, which will tighten that whole piece up here for a second. right? And let's see if that works. A little better, huh? So now I don't need to have as big of a UL, right? So I can make it so it's 100. So it ties in with what I had up here. And refresh. Now you notice that's a little bit too light, right? So maybe 100, maybe buck 10. Looks like buck 20 was perfect. But what we're going to do for this one, yes, is we're going to make it so that our text align for my my list items, all my list items are to the right, right? Because right now my list item, my drop-down menu itself is appearing, my drop-down, right? But I want all of my list items, just like I have here, where I have my where I have text align right from all my ULs. That means in the drop-down itself, I have I should have that as well. So I'll say text align right. Let's see if that works. And I'll also do the same thing with my my anchor tags. So say text align right. So I want to make sure that they align right as well. And I can also take away some of my padding and all that kind of stuff. Because I added some padding inside of my list items themselves too, which is just padding on the right-hand side. So that didn't affect it. With that, and it wouldn't because it's inheriting styles from this piece where I say my line height is 40 pixels. That's okay. My text decoration is now my color and all that stuff. Display block. It's going to inherit all the way down the line, right? But somewhere I have my my vertical alignment and my text alignment, right? So how do I align those things so that they're to the right as opposed to the left, like where they are right now? Well, for me to do it properly, I'd have to put a test border around these things to align them right and left. For now, let's leave it alone. So I need to move on within the next 8 minutes. Okay, a couple things I need to do also is when I hover over these things, my UL, my dropdown, should have a Z index. I talked about Z index. My Z index should be like 100, right, or something big. And the reason for that is because if I don't put a Z index of 100, it's not going to hover on top of potentially other items that have borders and everything else underneath it, right? So just to make sure, we put a Z index in there in my dropdown. Okay, so save. No effect. You can't see the effect, but just in case there was something in here, it wouldn't hover. It wouldn't go away. So that's kind of the simple way to do a dropdown. But my problem lies when I do one of these, right? Here's my problem. Can I even get to my dropdown in here? Well, yeah, if I can find it, right? And right now, what I really have is it scrunches up and it shows me this couple of the links, right? What I want to do is that when I get to this space, this size, different. So how do I do that? Well, we're going to talk about really briefly, which we're going to kind of cover next week in more detail, responsive design techniques, right? So again, if I go to our PowerPoint, which I've already put online for you, so if you want to preview it for your final project or for your assignment, which I also should talk about, it's right in here. It's under week 9 in the second part, where we talk about some responsive design, responsive web pages. Part of it is the meta element that we already put into play, right? And it also talks about a couple things, flexible images and this idea of a fluid grid, which we made last week. Remember we made that grid where I had all the grid pieces? Every one of the grid pieces, the columns have 8.3%. That's how we create kind of a grid, right? And we can assign a certain length of column and so on for our design. But what I really want to get into is things like our media queries, which really can save us. So if I want to skip down here for a second, which we're going to go into this in more detail next week, right? I want to get into that media query piece, which is right here. So here's one we can put in. This is what it looks like for a media query. And if you notice what the media query does is we have to use the @media decorator, right? And and underneath the at media decorator, we can specify new styles for that size of screen. So if I say max width, so at media only screen and max width of 480 pixels, that means for small screen sizes, for smartphones, I want a different style, right? So how do I do that? I can also say, well, media only screen width and min width of 480 pixels. That means for all this stuff that I'm doing right now is minimum width of 480 pixels. But for everything else, I don't want to use this style at all. And this is really what I want to do. So let's try this out. So minimum of 481, let's say 480 pixels or more, right? So let's type this out. So at media only screen and min width, all right? So I want to put this around my entire nav bar. All this stuff here, my nav styles, should be all for minimum width of 480 pixels. So I'm going to say at media, right? And it's going to be only screen, right? And min dash width, if you notice with a colon, of 480 pixels. Let's say we'll try 480 pixels first, right? And then I'm going to open up a parentheses here, or a curly brace. I'm going to take that curly brace, I'm going to go all the way to the bottom, and I'm going to put it down here. So these styles only apply to screens that are larger than 480 pixels. That's what it says, minimum width of 480 pixels. If I do that, and let's just do some formatting. Unfortunately, it doesn't allow me to, but I could, what I want to do is kind of just tab this in just one touch, just like this. So you can see that it's kind of layered inside of my media only screen and minimum width 480 pixels. So 480 pixels then is a breakpoint, and I can have certain breakpoints across my screens. Like for example, about 800 pixels or 768 pixels would be the size of the minimum width of let's say an iPad or something like that, or between 480 and 768, right? And then when it goes higher than that, for example, screen size is larger than 768 or 900 pixels, you know you're just dealing with desktop. And there are some standard breakpoints we can look at in a second, but let's just see what this says. So if I try this out and go back to my page and refresh, then I get this. Everything's the same. But when I move this down and I go less than 480 pixels, right, then I get this, right? This style here. It's unstyled. Why? Because my screen is less than 100 than these number of pixels. I have to produce new styles for this. And we're not going to do that this time around, right? So it works nice up to here. So notice it works nice to here. But once I get below, and maybe 480 pixels isn't the right size, because look, I'm good here, right? 699. But once I go below, let's say 680 pixels, which is really more like it for me, right? That's when my design breaks, right? So that's my breakpoint for my design, 680 pixels. If it's not 680 pixels or more, I'm going to work. So I can change this to 680 pixels. And let's go back all the way up here, right, and refresh, right? And now when I drag it to the left, I'm good all the way down till I'm about 680 pixels, right? Once I'm below 680 pixels or above that, notice how it switches off like this, right? It goes into my style, this top-down style. And the reason for that is, and I can specify whatever number I want, right? But that's the breakpoint that I can specify. Now, if that's too low, I can keep going down. I can try 580 because I want to make sure that that works. See, that's pretty good. 580 is okay so far. But below 580, once I go below that, you know, there's going to be a point in time where, you know what, it's not going to be good. So I can keep going a little higher. So I can say, well, you know what, 680 is too much, but what about 600, right? So beyond 600 pixels, I don't want to do that style, right? So that's no good. But when I go a little bit higher, right, still, I don't capture everything at this point, right? So 600 isn't good enough. It has to be more than 600, like let's say 620. 620. That's almost good, right? That kind of is the last point where 620 works. That's the last point that I can see all my links, right? Anything below that, I can't see my links anymore. So that disappear my links, make them into this kind of list. And we're going to talk about that next week. Okay, let me update my my GitHub stuff. So added media queries. right? And go in here and push, right? A little bit of responsive design techniques there. One thing to talk about the assignment. So Keith, you had a question about the assignment before we go. What was the question you had?
Well, it's just, I was wondering, are you looking for a nav bar primarily, or is it the in-page navigation, or what is it that you're exactly looking for?
So it says here that design a single HTML page template to contain the navigation list, complete with the bogus content, right? Well, the navigation list looks like this.
Yeah.
That's what I want.
Okay, so you're not looking for a nav bar with drop downs.
Well, I didn't ask for that, right?
Yes, you do.
Where?
Well, it's,
Oh, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. Yes. And then, yes, it would be a nav bar with I'm sorry, I didn't realize that. It would be a nav bar with drop downs. That's why I'm showing you the drop downs now. You should have actually seen that earlier. You know what? Honestly, I didn't notice that. I apologize.
okay,
You guys need more time to implement that feature because today's Friday is due today. Who's done your assignment number 4, right? Yeah, some people done, but some people aren't done. How about this? Let me extend you until Monday. Would that be enough time to give you that drop down capability? Okay, let's do that. So I'll extend assignment 4 till Monday. Yes.
Also, there's only one submission that you've already submitted.
I'll fix that too, right? So let's go and do that now before we stop for the day. Thanks a lot, guys. See you next week.